In this video, we're going to look at a typical was conversation. And what I mean by that is really the conversation happening between the application and the queue manager. And of course, we've already looked at part of that, but now we're going to look at it in a little bit more detail. So remember earlier we had talked about the MQI, and we have this application, and the application is going through the MQI layer. Remember, that's an API, so that's your A, the application is going to be doing all that work, and it's going to go into the queue manager like we've been drawing. Now remember that there are major calls and minor calls, where major calls just mean the more popular calls, and then separately there are the minor calls, which are less popular calls. But in either case, the application is going through the MQI and off to the queue manager to do the work that it needs to do. Now, I would recommend watching this video. I'll put a link to this video below the description of this particular video we're in. And if you get a chance, this is a great video to watch because it will essentially go through everything I'm going to go through and in a bit more detail. So the way we have been drawing things thus far has looked like this. We have had an A for an application, and we have had this queue manager out here. And our A has been sort of like a C program or a Java program or a .NET program. And now we're going to, we're going to look at the case of ICFM, where this is actually a WAS server, WebSphere Application Server. And then our A is the thing running inside here. And the question is, well, what does the communication look like between these two pieces? And I'm going, because this can be a sort of long conversation, I'm going to make this a bit bigger. So like this. Okay, and it turns out that it's a slightly more complicated setup in this when WAS is running the application. And the question is, okay, well, what do I mean by that? All right, let's take a look. So the first thing that happens here is that when your application wants to get a hold of the queue, like we've been talking about before, the first thing it's going to do is run something called, we're just going to make this connection over here. And I'm assuming that this whole thing is actually, although I'm saying QM as the queue manager, there's some sort of queue. We're going to call it queue just for simplicity. And so the very first thing it's going to do is going to run this thing called MQCon. And this connection is going this direction. And what it's going to do is connect over to the queue manager, unsurprisingly. And the second thing that it's going to do is issue what's called an MQ open. So the MQCon was just simply opening up the queue manager. Now MQ open is going to open up the queue, which is called queue in this case. Then after that, it's going to run another command called MQCB. And the CB stands for a callback. And really what's going to happen is it's going to register a callback on this queue, specifying the browse option. So in other words, a callback is just saying, hey, look, I need to register with you here on this queue. My name is so-and-so and whatever. And it's basically just registering, here I am. This is me. Please put me on your system. That's it. That's the callback. So it does that. Now, the next step is that the client is going to run what's called MQCTL, and that's going to start the callback using MQCTL, which stands for control, and wait for the messages to arrive. So it's able to control now what has happened, but that's come before. It's able to control this communication back and forth. Now, at this point, the conversation switches gears, and it goes this direction. And now what happens is when a message comes in to our queue, so we've got this other application out here, and for simplicity, I'm just going to call it A, and we're going to say that A put a message on queue, just like that. And then queue is going to send it over here. This is the idea. It's going to send it off this direction. Okay. When that happens, so when the message arrives on queue, the queue manager is going to mark it, and it's going to send a copy of the message over to our application over here. I'm just going to call this our application over here, our WAS application, right? Call it W. And the way this works is it sends a copy, right? So we're saying essentially this message is going to get copied over there. And once it gets over to W here, what's going to happen is the WAS the application is going to create what's called an MSG ref, or a message reference. And it's just a unique identifier. It's saying, there could be thousands of messages. Which one is this specifically? And it's built out of something called a token. And it's sort of like a hash. It's just trying to identify the message. Now, once that is done, the WAS server needs to get a session from what's called the session pool. So basically, you can imagine that like this. There's a session pool, and all that means is, if you want to run some work, you need to get a session pool. So it's going to be like a number, right? It'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe 4 is available right now, but 1 through 3 are not. So the session number is going to be 4, right? And so it gets this session. And then once that session is available and it's loaded, it's going to run inside that session essentially. So now it's basically running inside 4. This server session 4. Now, the next thing that has to happen is it's going to construct a piece of work containing the server session plus the message reference. So, you have this, I'm going to call it session number, and which we know is 4 in this case. And it's going to have some reference number, right? X, Y, Z. It's got both of those things. It's going to construct a piece of work containing the server session plus the message reference, and ask the work manager, which is something running inside WAS. Let's call this the work manager. It's going to sort of send all that off this piece here. It's going to send that into the work manager, and then the work manager is going to run it. And then the work manager gets a thread. So in order for all that to run, it has to get a thread. So this thread is over here. This is a thread pool, which means, if you're running some application, something like, something .exe, and that would be a process that would be running. And if it needs to do a bunch of work, it would spawn or fork a bunch of threads so it can run itself quickly. So T1, thread 1, and thread 2, and thread 3. So it's basically the same thing. It's just running it, 3 times as fast, right? It's 3 threads. So it gets a thread from thread pool. And now things get a little bit more interesting because this back and forth has now shifted again. And now we're going to do like this. So it's back to the queue manager. And this time we're going to do an MQ con fork connection. And this is the first time the server session has really been used, so it's going to connect over. The next thing it's going to do is run an MQ open. And that's going to, and unsurprisingly, right, we saw this before, it's going to open up that queue. In this case, it's called queue. Now it's going to do something different from before. This is called an MQ get. And what that means is the message that was over here is now going to be, well, first of all, it's going to be transferred back over here like this. And once that's done, it is also going to be completely deleted. That's called a destructive get, and all gets are destructive, really. So that's just going to be completely wiped out at that point after the MQ get. I'll keep this white so you can see that they're related. And then what's going to happen is the QM1 returns that message, of course, and then it's going to call the code over here that needed to be called, and it will pass in the entire message that it got, right? So at this point, that message is over here, and the message is used to perform the work that was sent into that work manager. And then from there, so there's actually a function, you'll see this in this video. Once that completes, it's going to return the server session back to the pool, and it's going to return this work, the session number and the message reference, they all get returned back here. So they're all back. So this is available for somebody else to use again, and the server can continue doing its processing. And essentially at that point, the conversation has ended.